Breaking tonight, new developments on a pair of rulings today on Obamacare that could ultimately lead to the law's dismantling. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. The powerful D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals concluding this morning that the way the federal health care exchange, healthcare.gov, is set up violates the law. Specifically, it concluded the subsidies offered to make health care affordable were never approved by Congress. According to one Harvard public health scholar, the ruling, if upheld, will, quote, significantly cripple Obamacare. Another liberal scholar agreed, writing in the left-wing New Republic, quote, there's no use sugarcoating it. If this ruling is affirmed, it would throw the law into chaos. The vast majority of beneficiaries would be suddenly unable to afford their premiums, and millions of people would drop out of the insurance marketplaces. The healthcare law does provide for subsidies to make insurance more affordable for some, but it says that that help can only go to folks who buy insurance through an exchange, quote, established by the state. Got it? The state, not the federal government. Problem is, only 14 states and D.C. even bothered to set up an exchange. The other 36 let the feds do it through healthcare.gov. Remember that, Joy? All told, about 5.4 million customers got their coverage through that problem-laden website, and nearly 90% of those receive federal subsidies. Subsidies that have now been ruled illegal. If the D.C. decision stands, all hell will break loose on this already chaotic law. Premiums will skyrocket. People will lose their coverage. And the dreaded death spiral, where not enough people enroll in Obamacare to make it work, could very well doom this law once and for all. However, another very similar case was decided today by a different appeals court. That one came down in the administration's favor. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Virginia ruling that Congress probably did mean to allow these subsidies, whether the exchange was a state or a federal one. Bottom line now, this will go to the U.S. Supreme Court. But in the meantime, millions of people face yet another round of uncertainty when it comes to their health care, something near and dear to their hearts, all thanks to a law most Americans never wanted. Jonathan Turley is a constitutional scholar and professor at the George Washington University Law School. Professor, good to see you tonight. And so the administration suffered a bad blow in the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, but a victory in Virginia. How is the Supreme Court likely to rule?
Well, it's an interesting problem. You know, these two circuits are divided barely by a river. You stand on one bank and the health care is in robust health, and you stand on the other and it's on life support. So it's a real conflict. These judges looked at the same law, the same language, and came to diametrically opposed views or conclusions. The real dividing line here is how these different courts viewed the role of agencies. You know, the Fourth Circuit basically said that they would defer to the IRS. And what the IRS said is the meaning of the law is the meaning of the law.
And let me just jump in, because this is yet another circumstance where Congress failed to say all that much in the law. They said state exchanges. But the IRS said, don't you worry. By states, they didn't mean states. They mean states or the feds. And we're all too happy to start rewriting the law, even though the people's representatives were not there to approve it.
Well, I have to say, I agree with the D.C. Circuit opinion. I don't see the ambiguity. In fact, I find it rather odd that a line that says that tax credits are linked directly to states with state exchanges is viewed as somehow ambiguous. What happened is this interpretation, as you noted, came out when a very unexpected event occurred, when 36 states decided not to create their own exchanges. And that promises a possible exodus and a cascading failure of the ACA. And the administration stepped in and avoided it through this active interpretation. But what's really involved here is these decisions really are not about health care. They're about how powerful federal agencies have become. The Fourth Circuit says the law is what the IRS says it is.
Who elected
and the D.C. Circuit, well, the D.C. Circuit says the law is what Congress wrote as its meaning. So it's a real sharp dichotomy. But I think what you're going to see is the Obama administration will appeal this not first to the Supreme Court, but to the D.C. Circuit as an en banc decision.
Right, because it was a three-judge panel that issued this ruling against the administration today, but they have the right to ask all of the judges on that Court of Appeals to sit. But that's just the next step, and if that court rules in the administration's favor, it's still going to go up to the Supreme Court, is it not, most likely?
I think it is. I mean, the fact is, this is one of the largest federal programs ever attempted. It should not go forward with questions of legitimacy.
And what happens then,
Professor? These are very significant questions.
If this goes up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and let's say the Supreme Court rules in favor of the D.C. Circuit, as they did, and they say, you know what, the law said you only get these subsidies if it's through a state exchange. It didn't say state or federal. It specifically said state. And that's how we're going to interpret the law, the way Congress wrote it. If they say that, then you have people across the political spectrum today saying that cripples Obamacare. That will gut the law, is what happens. Because at that point, we're a year from now, at best, and people have the subsidies. They've bought the insurance. It goes away. Those subsidies are now illegal. Healthcare.gov gets shut down. What happens?
Well, it will be a bloody mess. The problem is that the president was found by the D.C. Circuit to have exceeded his authority, to have violated, again, the separation of powers. But in this case, that violation led to the commitment of hundreds of billions of dollars in the past and future years. And that is a serious problem. Now, no one's going to ask those people to pay the money back. But the entire premise of the ACA, its viability, is then at risk. I don't see how the ACA can survive without this system, at least in the form as it was originally designed to have. Now, does that mean it'll collapse? Well, it would collapse unless Congress would be willing to make massive changes and massive subsidies to back those up.
And good luck with that, with a GOP-controlled House and the law more unpopular than ever. Professor Jonathan Turley, thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
Well, the White House today dismissed the ruling on Obamacare subsidies, saying it has no practical impact for now, and the ruling has been stayed while these appeals play out. Press Secretary Josh Earnest instead spent the majority of the media briefing taking tough questions about the violence raging now in Israel and Gaza, about the shoot-down of a passenger plane over Ukraine, about the massive surge of illegal refugees on our southern border, and about why, with all of this going on, the president is tonight at a fundraiser. The second one he has attended today, and just one of 6 over the next 3 days. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry is live at the White House tonight. Ed?
Megan, the president will be on to San Francisco and then Los Angeles to continue that fundraising. 6, as you say, over the course of 3 days. He's under fire tonight because despite all of the crises you just laid out, fundraising has dominated his schedule over the last few weeks. Remember last week, just hours after the jetliner was downed over Ukraine, he continued that schedule in New York City with fundraising. 2 weeks ago, it was the border crisis in Texas dominating the agenda. He continued the fundraising. I pressed Josh Earnest, the White House press secretary, today on why the midterm elections are consuming so much of the president's time. Listen.
What about the president's time? What about the fact that there's 5 work days this week, and 3 of them he's fundraising?
Well, I think I will hazard a guess that a significant portion of the president's time each of those days will be dedicated to participating in the presidential daily briefing, getting updates from his national security team about the situation on the ground, making phone calls to world leaders.
So the White House's point tonight is that, look, the trappings of office follow the president wherever he goes. He can get secure phone lines on Air Force One, talk to world leaders, huddle with his national security team. And so they sort of have this what us worry kind of mentality that they don't worry about the optics of all of this. But the fact that on Wednesday the president was expected to go on Jimmy Kimmel's late night talk show in Los Angeles and they canceled that shows, they understand some of this criticism is taking hold. Megan?
Ed Henry, thank you. Well, it's not just the media or political pundits questioning the president's focus on fundraising. Top members of his own party have taken note. Today, Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein of California said this.
Look, I'm not going to tell the president what to do, but I think the world would very much respect his increased attention on this matter. I think the leader of the free world has to be strong, and this is a time where strength is necessary.
Robert Zimmerman is a Democratic strategist. He's with me now. Wow, Dianne Feinstein, not going easy on the president. Your take on it?
Look, clearly she's expressing her point of view about the foreign policy crisis we're facing.
But
she's
do you
a
agree with
respected
her?
senator. I think the president has been strong. I respect Dianne Feinstein, but I think the president has shown leadership, especially as he addressed the situation in the Middle East.
You kind of have to do it continuously.
Well, absolutely. That's part of the drill. And I think, in fact, you look at a president's record, even Bibi Netanyahu gave the president great credit for his initiatives in Syria that got the chemical weapons away from Assad. Certainly we have peace talks that are moving forward in Iran because of the strength of the
you heard the
sanctions.
questioning with Ed Henry. Out of 5 days this week, 3 of them, he's going out on fundraisers. And he does it at a politically sensitive time. All the time. You know, the night after the Benghazi murders, he went out to Vegas and fundraised. The night that Russia invaded Crimea, he went out fundraising. When he went down to the southern border, did he go actually to the border to visit the crisis? No, he went to Austin and had a fundraiser. Now, once again, as the plane comes down and Israel's in Gaza, he goes to more fundraisers. Now the crisis continues this week. More fundraisers.
And of course, Megyn, all his critics would just embrace him and support him if he didn't participate in fundraisers. Let's understand the political game that's being played here. And in fairness, both parties do. After 9/11, when George W. Bush actually used the tragedy of 9/11, exploited it during the midterm elections and also in his own re-election campaign, Democrats, my party, criticized him for doing it. And likewise, you're seeing now the president criticized by Republicans for engaging in fundraising.
Dianne Feinstein is not a Republican,
No,
last
she's
I
not.
checked.
No, she's not. I really don't call that a criticism of the president either.
She's asking for leadership.
That's right. But that doesn't mean he should abdicate his responsibilities to build his coalition and to build his majority. Let's be serious now.
All right,
He's
well,
not
let's
just
talk about
fundraising at the expense of governing. That's not the issue. We all know that's the case.
Well, that's what Josh Earnest says, because he says he's got his phone and he's got Air Force One, which is all sorts
every
of fancy
president
things
does.
on it.
I mean,
but let me ask you about that. Why is he
okay.
so worried? Does this show a real anxiety about losing the Senate in particular come midterms?
There's no question going into the midterms that the Senate is up for grabs, and it could swing either way. There's no question about it. And it's critical to his governance, as it is for every president, to have their party in power in the Senate and the House. But let's try to put this in some sort of realistic perspective. The issue here is not the president fundraising. More galling to me is the hypocrisy of the right wing and the Republicans. Because when they saw a Republican president engage in fundraising, they didn't advocate, they didn't take the Republican president on. And the bigger point is...
It's not just the Republicans. I mean, who cares what the Republican pundits are going to say about Barack Obama? They don't like him, they're going to rip on him. But when you hear Dianne Feinstein coming out and saying, leadership would be great right now. That would be terrific, Mr. President. People perk up and say, wait a minute, this is crossing party lines now.
Well, she's talking about one aspect of his policy she differs with him on.
No, but she's ripping on the fundraisers.
Well,
this isn't just absent without leave. She's talking about the fundraisers.
And here's the reality. If you want to, look, I find fundraising abhorrent, and I've been active on national finance boards in almost every presidential campaign since '96. But if you want to change the system, then you've got to step up and try to put laws in place to provide more transparency, support the Udall Amendment to repeal Citizens United. Democrats are doing that. Republicans are supporting the status quo, which means special interest money, non-disclosed funds, and increased super PAC dependence. That's the score, Megyn.
The risk to him is that he runs the risk of looking insensitive. Today, he swung by the Dutch embassy and said, no words can adequately express the sorrow we feel over this loss. It's made more acute by the deep ties of friendship we have. I'm out of here. I got to go to a fundraiser, where, by the way, it costs $10,000 for an individual and $32,000 for a couple, which would be a terrible deal for the couple. Why wouldn't they just file as individuals?
And if we repealed Citizens United, and if we took action legislatively to change the system...
No response to my math joke? Nothing?
Actually, it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad.
Okay.
New math, though.
I took a real risk. I mean, both math and a joke. All right,
thank you,
thank you,
Robert. You can do stand-up anytime. Great to be with you.
Here's the truth. I got that from my husband. Well, over the last few weeks, a growing number of editorial writers on the right and the left have questioned why the Obama administration has been caught so off guard, apparently, by the series of crises, especially since several of them came with early warning signs months ago. So this week, Washington Post writer Chris Cillizza threw the White House a life preserver, apparently, with a column that argues, quote, it is virtually impossible to be a successful modern president. Britt Hume is our senior Fox News political analyst, and he joins me now. Britt, and the point of that assertion is what?
Well, the point is that this president is having a hard time. George W. Bush left office with a low popularity rating, and after having waged what turned out to be an exceedingly unpopular and protracted war, and therefore the case is made. It wasn't made, you may recall, back when Barack Obama was running and Bush was still president, that the job was too hard. We all thought that the anointed one was going to come in and we were going to be back in clover again. The last time we had a round of this argument that Chris Cillizza, who's otherwise a pretty sharp guy, was making is in the latter stages of the Carter administration. and it was virtually the same argument. May I quote to you from a book by the conservative commentator and author Stephen Hayward, who wrote a book called The Age of Reagan, and he took note of some of these comments we'll be making that we're hearing about now and we're hearing about at the time. This from Barbara Tuchman, the famous historian, quote, "The job of president is too difficult for any single person." Columnist Joseph Kraft, who was very prominent in Washington in that era. "The presidency as an institution is in trouble. It has become, as Vice President Mondale said in a recent interview, the fire hydrant of the nation." Newsweek magazine, in some measure, they're talking about the presidency, has defeated the last 5 men who had held it and persuaded some of the people who served them that it is in danger of becoming a game nobody can win. That's basically the argument that Saliza is making. Those arguments, by the way, were made toward the end of the Carter administration. About halfway through the Reagan administration, you didn't hear them anymore.
Nobody was saying it anymore. And even when George W. Bush was in trouble, were these writers trying to throw him a lifeline by saying, oh, it's just an impossible job now. That's the bottom line.
This is an argument made usually by liberals on behalf of Democratic presidents who are having a hard time.
Okay, but let's kick it around for fun. What he argues is that these are the reasons. The decline of the bully pulpit as a persuasion mechanism. We've heard that from the president a lot, that they failed to articulate their point as well as they needed to, and that is why things like Obamacare remain so unpopular. Deep partisanship present not just in Congress but in the electorate, and the splintering of the mainstream media, the rise of social media.
Yeah, well, okay, all those things have happened. I don't see how they make the presidency all that much more difficult. Look, the President Obama is not in trouble because the mainstream media have splintered. He's not in trouble because of social media. He's not in trouble for any of those reasons. He's not in trouble necessarily because of the partisanship. He's in trouble, the kind of trouble he's in tonight. Think of this, Megan. This presidency took office talking about how he's going to bring the country together. He passes his health care initiative on a totally partisan basis. And this court decision by the D.C. Circuit today is as good an example as you'll ever see of why it's unwise to do that. Just think of it this way, Megan. If he had offered things to the Republicans that were tempting to them, and he didn't, and they had a number of them, there'll be a cadre of them, a cohort of them who would have voted for the measure, at which point it would have become a bipartisan bill. At which point, when problems were found within it, there would have been Republicans willing to join Democrats in Congress to fix it. As it is, there aren't any. Indeed, the House of Representatives is in the hands of the Republican Party, and firmly so, largely because, or to considerable measure, because of this very bill. So this is the problem that he created for himself by choosing to go the route he went.
The Obamacare bill was rammed down the throats of the American Congress, which tried to resist it by electing Scott Brown. The White House wouldn't have it. They changed the rules in the Senate, and they pushed it through. And now they seem shocked that these very same people's representatives and states who bore the brunt of the law aren't willing to work with them on a solution.
Well, that's exactly right. And this is a question, the difference between being smart, which the president unquestionably is, and being wise, which I think he evidently is not. This was a very unwise thing to do, and to do it the way he did it. And this is the kind of thing that's happened. This partisanship in Washington, look, the way you overcome partisanship is you compromise. Now, we've got a lot of Republicans that don't want to compromise, and I'm not praising them tonight. But this president has never mastered the knack, A, of creating relations with members of Congress, and with figuring out how to offer some of what they want and their constituents want in exchange for their votes. The result is that on the stimulus, which was his first major initiative to try to revive the economy, and on health care, he didn't have any Republican support at all. And if he'd had it, he'd be in much better shape politically, and so would his party, now that these things have become such a problem.
Yeah. One other question. If you and Kim are going to a fundraiser and the price is either $10,000 per individual or $32,000 for a couple, I mean, don't you just say, like, Kim who? What? I'll meet you there, honey.
You just buy separate tickets. That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
That's what. Now, what did the splintering of the mainstream media have to do with that, right?
How dumb do they think married people are? All right, Britt, good to see you.
You too, Megan. Thanks.